Well, the Trump administration will divert $3.6 billion in defense spending for 175 miles of the president's wall along the U.S. Mexico border. The Pentagon has not yet revealed which projects will lose their funding for the wall. The Trump administration says anything that loses funding is merely delayed. But a Democratic aide told CBS News congressional Democrats will not make up funding for those projects, in effect, canceling them. Defense Secretary Mark Esper insists that diverting the money from other projects is necessary to support America's efforts at the southern border. Congressional Democrats are criticizing the plan. In a statement, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said canceling military construction projects at home and abroad will undermine our national security and the quality of life and morale of our troops, making America less secure. This senseless decision will only worsen the underlying causes of migration. Earlier today, President Trump addressed the shift in Pentagon funding. He said the Secretary of Defense spoke to members of Congress about the change.
Secretary of Defense spoke with members of Congress and explained it to them, and I think he felt very good about it. He feels it's a national security problem. I do too. It is when you have thousands of people trying to rush our country. I think that's national security. When you have drugs pouring into our country, I view that as national security. And he had very good conversations with various members of Congress.
I want to bring in Kevin Cirilli at the White House. He's chief Washington correspondent for Bloomberg News. So, Kevin, walk us through this. We heard the president say that his Secretary of Defense spoke to members of Congress, called the wall a national security problem. Why is the White House taking these steps to divert defense spending now?
Two words, a budget battle. And when lawmakers return from congressional recess next week, they are poised to have another budget battle over funding over immigration. It's a rerun of sorts, a political episode that we've seen, Rena, time and time again. And we actually even saw it recently play out during Hurricane Dorian, in which Democrats used a similar line of political attack in criticizing Republicans for trying to reallocate funds from FEMA that they said would better bolster some of the conditions at the facilities for undocumented immigrants. So all of this comes as the president has been trying for quite some time now to try to get funding for that border secure wall. And the way and the mechanism in which he's been doing that has launched into a political back and forth.
You know, Democrats have said that they file legal challenges to the diversion of funds. Do you think they'll be successful with that?
Well, if you look at the previous court record, they haven't been successful up until this point. Now, they have said consistently that they are going to try to use everything in their legal powers to pursue every option of the law. But previous legal precedent, Rena, as you and I have talked about before, have sided with the president at least on these particular accounts. So it'll be interesting to see if they can make a different case and get a different outcome this time around.
I want to switch to the economy, something you also cover closely. There's a key gauge that showed that the manufacturing industry is shrinking. It shrunk in August, really, after 35 months of expansion. Do we know why that is, Kevin? And what does that ultimately mean for the economy?
Well, I spoke with several economists over the past week and a half or so who have consistently pointed to the issue of trade policy as why manufacturing numbers have started to slow down. Now, the administration points to strong wage growth. They also point to low unemployment rate. But if you look at the calculations that economists on Wall Street and Main Street are making, Rena, they point consistently to the manufacturing sector as potentially a forecaster of what could be the next 18-month cycle with regards to a potential economic slowdown or worse, a recession. Now, I do want to note a very careful caveat here because every economist that I've spoken with and every analyst who I've interviewed on the prospects of this notes that the foundations that were there for the Great Recession of 2008 are not there this time around. So any potential slowdown, at least as of now, doesn't poise to be as significant of a slowdown and recession that we saw in 2008, which I guess is a sign of relief.
I tell you, it's hard to follow this. It makes your head spin as to what gauge to look at and who's right and what. But one thing we did see yesterday, we saw the markets drop on the first day of trading after the latest round of tariffs on China kicked in. So Congress comes back next week. Does the White House feel the sense that they're up against the clock to find a solution to this trade war?
I think that they feel the increased pressure coming from Wall Street and Main Street that collectively is now forecasting and pricing in an economic slowdown in the next 18 months. You mentioned all of these economic indicators, but look, you don't have to have an economics degree to feel the pain of a slowdown in a recession. And so the bottom line is that politically speaking, the president, as we enter into just about a year out from an election day, has to factor in the political implications of how a prolonged trade war with China would impact many of the states that he needs to win for re-election. 2 dates on my calendar that I have my eye on with potential headwinds for China is, number one, if the Chinese delegation is going to come, as they've previously said they were, to Washington, D.C. later this month to continue ongoing trade talks with President Trump. And secondly, in mid-December, when another round of tariffs are set to go into effect against billions of dollars worth, more than $160 billion worth, according to a Bloomberg estimate, on Chinese imports. So if there's going to be a breakthrough before the end of the year, the clock is ticking down.
Do you get the sense that Chinese officials feel they can just wait and see what happens in November, or will they feel the crunch before then with these sanctions?
You know, I get the sense that they want people to think that they are going to wait it out. But here's where it gets particularly interesting. And you and I, again, have talked about this before. When you look at the Democratic field and you look at who's running for president, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, those are two prominent candidates, even if they don't get the nomination, even if they don't become president, who have a voice in the Democratic Party. And they've advocated for tariffs just as long, if not longer, than private citizen Donald Trump.
Sorry, I mentioned sanctions. I was thinking Iran. I meant trade tariffs with China. But I do want to ask you about sanctions in Iran. We know that the Treasury Department announced new sanctions on oil shipping networks allegedly operated by a branch of the Iranian military. We've heard this week from Iran's president saying he's not going to hold those bilateral talks with the U.S. until sanctions on the country are lifted. So what's really the next step in this battle with Iran?
Well, that threat is being met with a bit of an eye roll, a collective proverbial eye roll by half of the State Department officials. The administration has said consistently, the State Department has said consistently that they are not going to lift sanctions against Iran until they feel that Iran is willing to engage and stop their bad actor behavior. In terms of where this moves forward, French President Emmanuel Macron at the previous G7 meeting had indicated that he would essentially be willing to try to arrange a meeting between President Trump and President Rouhani of Iran. That, in the next couple of weeks, could potentially take place at the UN General Assembly meeting. But the administration, President Trump, Secretary Mnuchin, making no signal whatsoever that they are prepared to raise sanctions or to lift sanctions against Iran in the near future at all.
Kevin, before you go, I want to ask you about another House Republican who announced that they're declining their re-election bid. Texas Congressman Bill Flores, he's the 5th Texas Republican congressman who won't be running in 2020. Do you get a sense, are House Republicans concerned about how many of the representatives from the state are now leaving?
Add them to the list. I mean, there's been a handful of these House Republicans in a predominantly conservative state, Texas politics, that have said that they are not going to be running for re-election. I don't get the sense from Republican strategists who I was talking to yesterday about this as well. I don't get the sense that they're worried that they're going to lose the state, but it does point to a broader trend, perhaps, of potentially the congressional race and the congressional maps, not just in the House, but in the Senate, being a little bit closer. The Democrats are still anticipated, as of today, to hold on to control of the House come the 2020 elections, and Republicans still likely going to take back the Senate. But the margins could get interesting, and that has policy impacts for whomever were to take over the White House or retake the White House come November 2020.
Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thank you.